job in the city, working for the man every night and day. And I never lost one minute of sleep, and I was worried about the way that things might have been. The wheel keep on turning, Proud Mary keeps on burning, and we're rolling, 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 rolling on the river, rolling on the
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Now that Jay Weiner is finally here, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to the third annual gathering of the Society of Mississippi June Bugs. It's great to see such a large crowd here, much larger than the last two gatherings that we've had, thanks to Pius and others. And we want you to relax this evening, have fun, enjoy each other's company, hopefully learn a little bit, and we're going to try to get you out here on some semblance of time. If the Judge Pius has tasked me with being the timekeeper, among other things. So I apologize to anybody in advance that I have to cut off or give the sign to. But we got a lot to get through tonight, and that's why we're trying to start on time. We had to wait a minute to get the video cameras rolling, and of course for Jay to make his grand entrance. And now that that's all set, then we are ready to roll for the evening. And in our June Bug tradition, we're going to start off with a prayer. And I'm happy to say that we have our June Bug expert prayer person in the audience who, not the priest, but no offense, but there's no person that gives a more sincere and elegant prayer than Peyton Prosper, our own original June Bug. And he, among many other titles that he holds, he is a Jackson attorney. He is, some of you may remember that he was the state treasurer for a brief period of time for a cup of coffee back a few years ago. Kept the seat warm, I think when Marshall Bennett decamped to New York. And he's also, among his other claims to fame, he is the consul to the Republic of Germany for Mississippi. And he gives an excellent prayer, and we want him to come pray for us in English, please, Peyton.
Good evening, June Bugs. You will actually receive two blessings and one prayer tonight in this invocation. The first blessing is that you will not be subjected to any sort of contrived jottings of mine. The second blessing will be that you will hear through the voice of the poet laureate of the Mississippi Delta, Greenville's own William Alexander Percy, our prayer this evening. So I would like to read for you this poem from William Alexander Percy, Hymn to the Sun with a U. Strike down into my breast, O sun, and cleanse my soul. Shadows are here in ailments of the dark. Burn out the horror, sear away the dread, beat like live hope in spark on molten spark. Lone in your uncouth solitude of chasmed air, you scale the sky, reckless of end or change, chanting like some wild Himalayan shepherd, wind-rocked, enraptured on his bleak, vast range. Eternity will pass, and down the blue cliffs here you sing, vigorous still in fierce delight. Strike through my breast, our breast, and pour your courage in, enough to last this little way tonight. Thank you.
Amen, brother. Thank you.
One further word. I would admonish Pius and the powers that be that they consider Greenville possibly for another June bug excursion with its rich treasure of their heritage. Thank you.
Here, here, thank you, thank you. As a fellow Greenvillian, I would like to add an amen to that idea for Greenville for next year. Okay, so this is the dinner part of the evening. It's time for you to enjoy your dinner and the conversation. And as soon as the food comes out, we are going to start the program.
I'd say just go ahead.
Well, the judge has ordered that we're going to go ahead. So guess what? We're going to go ahead. He's calling himself, he's basically calling on himself because he's first on the menu here. And Dean Rosenblatt is here somewhere. I'm not sure where the dean is. There he is, right there. I had the pleasure of hearing Justice Scalia. I know I heard him once, and I think I heard him actually twice at the Mississippi College School of Law. And he, one of the things, I don't remember what he said about the law, but I do remember what he said about his introduction. His introduction went on and on and on and on and on. And it was a breakfast where everybody's going to come and eat breakfast and then go to their office and work. And the introduction was going on and on. He said, he got up, when he finally got up to speak, he said, the most important people get the briefest introductions, such as, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. And that got a big laugh in the audience and said, ladies and gentlemen, impious.
I'm going to save time because I thought they could go ahead and serve while I'm talking. And I'm talking because Dr. Meredith insisted that I do. And I appreciate so much him taking this burden off of me because the last two times I have had to MC. And it is a tough, tough job. He wanted me to introduce everybody here. And I don't know if I can. I'm not even really going to try. But I'm going to stand up. My lovely wife, Mona. She's been my trophy wife a long time. Everybody who has been to every June bug invocation, convocation, stand up. Everybody's made every one of the trips. Look at this. These are the best ones. Morgan Cuterini is working. She and these wonderful kids from Itawamba Community College are here because Bill Luckett recommended them a year ago, and it should have been me, but it's not. So Morgan, Miss Cuterini, I want y'all to welcome her because she'll play a big role. And then people will say, well, what is a June bug? And it's about relationships. Mr. Dunlap, you need a seat.
Yes, sir.
That's someone. Where is Bill Luckett? He needs to be looking out for you.
I'm looking out for you.
All right, Bill's back there in the back. It's about relationships, and everybody in here, we have relationships that go back a long, long, long time. Three of my favorite new relationships because of the June bugs are the ladies from Little Zion Missionary Baptist Church, who I met last year. I want y'all to stand. These three ladies mean a lot to me. And they drove up here tonight just to be with us. Sylvester, and I don't know if y'all, how many of you remember Sylvester Hoover, but he's a real star of the documentary you will see. He had to leave tonight. He had to go to Chicago and cannot be with us. But please remember Sylvester because he had a death in his family and couldn't be here. How did this thing start? About 3 years ago, and I know Mona and Rebecca over here tired of hearing about it, but was it January the 7th or 8th? It was the 8th of January. I had a bad heart attack. And word went out, rumors went out that I died. And they were actually quite true. I died 3 times that day. And I went through a week of some serious medical procedures. While I was in the hospital tied to the gurney, I got a letter from Jimmy Robertson, who was one of my law professors in law school. Jimmy, stand up so everybody here knows who Jimmy Robertson is. This is former Justice Jimmy Robertson.
I was practicing medicine without a license.
And Jimmy wrote me a letter. And when you have what they call a widowmaker heart attack and survive, everybody else who has been through it writes you a letter. And they start calling and telling you their story. So Jimmy wrote me a letter, 3 or 4 pages. And I don't know if he meant for it to be humorous, but in the letter he said he had a heart attack in Hannibal, Missouri. And that's about the worst place in the world to have a heart attack on a weekend. And they sent this van to get him, and they put him on a gurney, and they put him in the van. And these people asked Jimmy, said, can you tell us on a scale of 0 to 10 how much pain you're in? He said, 9. Do you have any medicine to help me? They said, no, we just want to know how much pain you're in. Well, I nearly had another heart attack when I read that. I thought it was so funny. But Jimmy had a list of things he wanted to do. And a week or so later, he and Philip Meredith came to my house and brought me a book. And at that time, I was still hooked up to that Farmall battery I was carrying around. It shocked me all the time. And I told Jimmy, one of the things he wanted to do was find this plaque at Harvard that was dedicated to Quentin Compton, who all of you know is a character in The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, and he's also an national outlet. And I said, Jimmy, if I live next year, we'll go to Harvard. And that's what we did. That's how this group came about, with Jimmy Robertson and Dr. Meredith and me sitting in my living room. So out of that has grown this. And it seems to have taken a life of its own. Bill Luckett has now turned it into some sort of business. I'm not sure what. But I want to thank Bill for this. And the other thing is Bill. I told Bill last fall, after I learned about his battle, because we've been through this, folks, and all we have left is the time we share with each other. I said, Bill, we're going to do it June the 3rd. It'll be either in your honor or your memory. And Bill, we're glad to still have you with us. It's a good man. I do have a couple of friends. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings by not introducing you, but I'm not going to introduce Roger with you. But Bernice Donald is here. Where's Bernice? Bernice and I literally have been around the world together. And I carry her luggage through airports in Eastern European countries because she carries herself as Tina Turner. And that's who people think this is. And she never tells them any differently. So if you run into us in Croatia or Montenegro or Bosnia, I am Tina's luggage boy. All of you have been something special to me. Each of you know it. And I don't have much more to say, Philip. You asked me to talk about the history, and that's it. Let's enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Pies. I'll just have to do a quick flashback to the beautiful moments of prayer that you read. That even fellow Greenville, you had that great thing going on. I noticed the word uncouth in there. That was, growing up in Greenville in the 60s, that was one of my mother's favorite words. And she always applied it to me, and I never knew what it meant until I got a dictionary in the 3rd grade and looked it up. So I did note that that word was in there. It was beautiful. I want to thank you for reading it. And thank you, Pies, for your comments and for thanking everyone that we said we were going to thank and welcome everybody. We said we're going to welcome. Now we are very pleased to have two warm-up acts for you tonight, and they both answer to the first name of Senator. As protocol would have it, the United States Senator from Mississippi will speak first, and I need to tell you about how it was that he came to be invited here. Come on up if you want. I was included on the email chain a few weeks ago, and it was between Judge Mills and Senator Wicker, and they dispensed with the pleasantries because they're good friends, and they just sort of had this it almost read like a telegram exchange. So it went like this. It went Mills to Wicker. Do you believe in free speech? Wicker, of course I believe in free speech. Mills, good. On June 4th, come to Clarksdale to give one. And here he is.
Thank you, Doctor. Mike Mills, once again, has put me on the spot, scheduling me between him and Hop Bryant. My brief remarks have a Charles Dickens theme tonight, and you ask, well, aren't we here for Tennessee Williams? Yes, we are, and I really don't apologize for this to a group that spent so much time on Camus and his literary accomplishments. But you should know the Poetry Foundation once described Tennessee Williams as a rebel who created characters as unforgettable as those of Charles Dickens. And so, as somewhat of a toast tonight and a few introductory remarks, this is entitled A Tale of None Too Many Junebugs, with apologies to Charles Dickens. It was the best of occasions. It was the worst of occasions. It was the solemnest of ceremonies. It was the silliest of ceremonies. It was an evening for the blues. It was a night of rock and roll. There were skills that earned the Oscar, the Pulitzer, and the Grammy. There were skill levels that cautioned, don't quit your day job. It was a moment for scholarly writings. It was a moment for pithy rhymes. There were songs of dejection and rejection. There were songs calling for mere satisfaction. More on that tomorrow. There was talent on loan from God. There were costumes on loan from Goodwill. We had everything to be proud of. We had much to be ashamed of. It was a day to wade in the water. It was a night to sip bourbon and water. It was a weekend to make new friends and keep the old. It was a weekend to depend on the kindness of strangers. There was a virus going around, people caught it and died. It was time for this pandemic panic to be over with. There was a judge with a graying beard and a black robe on the bench in Oxford. There was a prelate with white hair and a crimson robe in the Basilica of Clarksdale. There was a shrink with a list of academic degrees as long as your arm, whose services would go unused. There was an overworked undertaker and part-time pianist whose services were emphatically needed. In short, the time was so much like the first two times that there was no hesitation in moving ahead. In the Delta and in the hills, from the Loess Bluffs to the Pine Belt to the Black Prairie, all up and down and across the length and breadth of the Magnolia State, it was clearer than crystal to anyone paying close attention that events unique and memorable were about to transpire. It was, after all, June in the year of our Lord 2021, and in the year number 3 of the June bugs. And so, at this point, I propose a toast and ask those who would like to raise their glasses. It is a far, far better thing we do here than we sometimes have done. It is a far, far better rest we strive for, but then the night is young.
Yes, sir. Clarksdale's outstanding.
Okay, how about that? And I've got number 2 more on my back. I'll also go to the first name Senator. He is the Dean of the Senate, if not the legislature. Is it the Dean of the whole legislature?
No, we don't,
The Dean of the Senate. He wouldn't dare stoop to anything that refers to the House of Representatives, the lovely House of Representatives. So I have to tell you a story about, he's been the Dean of the Senate. He's been around a long time, but he wasn't always the Dean of the Senate. He was a little freshman pipsqueak legislator back when he had this pet project bill that was introduced in the Senate, and he was going to make sure that it passed. And he got word from the vice chairman of the committee that the chairman of the committee had killed his pet project bill. And he didn't like that very much when he heard it, and he let something sort of intemperate comment slip out like, "That stupid jerk, I'll get even with him later."
Was it Sonny Meredith?
It was not Sonny Meredith, thank you for asking. So what happened was the chairman, of course the word got back to the chairman that this little freshman legislator had called him a stupid jerk. And you can tell what happened. The chairman confronted the freshman legislator on the floor of the Senate and said, "Well, my vice chairman told me that you called me a stupid jerk." And Cobb replied, as he quick on his feet as he always is, "Mr. Chairman, I did not tell him that you're a stupid jerk. I don't know how he found that out." Cobb Ryan, well, here with a video that I'll have to say has been unscreened, and we have no idea what it's going to be about, uncensored, but here it is.
Who am I? What am I doing here? For those of you who were expecting a scholarly presentation, this is, of course, is a fraud. I'm not a scholar, but I do know a scholar. I know a scholar named David Kaplan. I met David in Columbus when he was there with Olympia Dukakis at the Tennessee Williams Festival in Columbus. Then later, I saw him here at the Tennessee Williams Festival in Clarksdale. And at the end of one of the presentations, I went up to him and said, "Would you like to see the Contreras Mansion?" He said, "Of course I would." So we went to the Contreras Mansion. A word about that, many of you know at one point it was in danger of being torn down, and I was opposed to that. In fact, I'm generally opposed to disposing of the water where the snowman used to be. But Eddie Brunini was over at the legislature on behalf of St. Dominic's, and I confronted him about this destruction of the Contreras Mansion. He kept saying, "That's not the diocese, it's not us, we don't have anything to do with it." I said, "Eddie, if you'll go over to St. Dominic's and get a busload of nuns and go up to Clarksdale, they can stop that." But fortunately, the people of Clarksdale stopped that. So the Contreras Mansions. Later, I went to Provincetown, where David Kaplan was the curator of the Provincetown Tennessee Williams Festival, and saw a play there I was quite taken with, Orpheus Descending. Later, the cast of that play, they're all from New York, basically, came to Mississippi, and the play was performed in Columbus, Oxford, and Jackson. Due to travel restrictions and various things, it's not possible to perform the play in Clarksdale, but they did have an off day. Bill Luckett was nice enough to entertain the cast at his house, and they got to see Clarksdale, where basically the play was set. And there's a character in the play, by the way, named David Couture, just to further. So I have asked Mr. Kaplan, who is a renowned director and a Tennessee Williams scholar, to prepare a brief video, and I think through the magic of the internets, we can now see the video.
Well, the problem is we have a lot of light right now. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see it.
Well, there's always something.
There is. We'll see. Yeah, that's a good idea. Is it okay if we show it later?
Does that mean I'll have to come back to the podium?
I know. Yeah, I don't think you can see it at all. And there knows. Well, that only helps a little. So you can't play it?
No, it's ready to go.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's the one.
I think it's still on.
Yeah. We're just going to let the projector warm up for a second longer. I think it'll get a little bit darker then. Pope? Pope, could you do something? He's not listening. Turn the whole thing around.
Everything on the computer.
I know, I was saying, they probably recommend to get
Yeah, that's fine with me. So I'm just running this video, right? Making sure it doesn't.
because right now,
Yeah. I think it's gonna get a little better, don't you think, Alexis? Yeah, they can.
By the time it's fully warmed up, the sun will be down. What? I said by the time the projector is warmed up, the sun will probably be down.
Yeah, it takes it a little while, but it's just too light outside with the So you want to just move along and we'll try to do it. What else do we have?
We got You're going to introduce yourself to the
I will, yeah. Should we leave this on?
yes.
Okay.
They recommended to probably do it closer to like 9.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, I didn't know we were going to show. This was good.
I didn't know.
I didn't think going too fast. I know, like, I mean, it's just like going
Yeah.
on.
I know.
All right, so the stewards are busy conferring among themselves about what we're going to do since the Pope is apparently not able to make the sun darken in the middle of in the late evening. So we're going to proceed with dinner, and hopefully it's going to be a little darker, and the projector will be warmed up by that time, and that will show synchronized video in a little bit. So I think we're going to move on to two of the main events for the evening. No offense, senators, but we have something that we've never done before, and if it looks like we're sort of making this up as we go along, it's because we are making this up as we go along, in that this just got put together a few days ago in terms of how we were going to handle the papers that everyone has written. So that's the next thing on our agenda tonight, is have a symposium panel discussion of papers. And I've literally got to refer to my phone because the order of business about this just went out so recently ago that I didn't take notes on it. Okay, so here's the order of business. It's going to be, Professor Wilson is going to read Breaking the Devil's Bargain. And that's by Rosalie Harden and Kevin Jones. And then after that, number 2, Hans Sinha is going to read Plague and Pandemic by Justice Jimmy Robertson. And he will make comments on his own paper. He'll be speaking second. And then third, Rosalie Harden is going to read Hans Sinha's A Beautiful Boy. And Hans will make comments on his own paper. And then we'll finish up with Jay. When you get here last, you get to go last on the program. So Jay Winter is going to read Global Clarksdale.
They're going to discuss
Yeah, I'm sorry, not read. Yeah, correct. Thank you for correcting. This is a discussion of papers, not a reading of papers. So we're going to have a discussant and the author talk about their papers. And we allotted 45 minutes for this, so by that time, hopefully we'll be dark enough to show videos. We've got Senator Bryan is going to show his video eventually, and then we've got the 75-minute world premiere of Morgan Kuderini's video that we're going to show later. That's Flights of the Mississippi Junebugs, A Greater Truth Than Money. And we're all looking forward to seeing it. And that'll close out the evening after. I'll close out the evening. So I'm going to call on first, as I said, Professor Wilson. Are you ready? I'm ready.
Good evening. So, I'm pleased to be here, and Philip asked us to say just very briefly something about ourselves, and how we got interested in a topic. So I'm Charles Reagan Wilson. I taught for 33 years at the University of Mississippi in Southern Studies and History. I was director of the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, editor of the New Encyclopedia of Southern Culture, the Mississippi Encyclopedia. I was blessed in my life to wind up at a place that could not be anywhere better to study what I wanted to study and to talk about what I wanted to talk about, which is the South of Mississippi. And I got interested in this topic because I had written about the Delta in the Mississippi Encyclopedia and other places, but I've never written much about or anything about Tennessee Williams. And what I learned most is how much Tennessee Williams drew from the Delta and Clarksdale and everything he did. A lot of his plays, best known like Glass Menagerie and Streetcar Named Desire, aren't set in Clarksdale at all, but if you look very deeply, he drew from characters and places around here and made them part of his work. So my paper is called Global Clarksdale, the Mississippi Delta in Local, Regional, and International Contexts. And what I did is to look at the Delta in what I think is a different way. We often tend to think about the Delta as an isolated kind of place. If you drive through, like Maria and I did from Oxford today, you have a sense you're going back in time almost. But if you think about the history of the Delta and the culture, that's not true at all. Delta planters from the beginning were concerned about the price of cotton in London and New York. They stocked their houses with the great antiques from Europe. They sent their children on the grand tour of Europe. And over again, you find these kind of connections. Well, the paper begins putting the Delta in an international world context. And it begins with Tennessee Williams. When he was 9 years old, he paid $4.50 for a globe. His aunt gave him the money because she realized he was a restless boy. And he bought the globe and he put his hand on it and he said, I'm going to go to every place on this globe. He didn't, but he went to many of them. He went to Italy many times. He went to Japan. Some people don't know that. He was friends with a great Japanese writer, and he picked up some Japanese aesthetic techniques that he used in his plays. So I talk about the background of the Delta in terms of the international connections, one of which, important, are the ethnic groups. And I spent a lot of time in my paper talking about the ethnic groups. People from outside the Delta don't think of the Delta in terms of having this rich diversity of population. And it's true that it's been defined by people who we put in these racial categories of white and black, but it's a rich ethnic history. The Chinese came here after the Civil War, coming from California, where they worked on the railroad, sometimes from China itself, labor agents. The plantation owners hoped they would work in the cotton fields, but they weren't working in cotton fields. They became grocers. And so it's a rich history of the Chinese grocery store in the Mississippi Delta. You had the Italians and the Lebanese and the Jewish people who came also in the late 19th century and early 20th century. They came through New Orleans, which is a major port of entry in that time period for people coming to the United States. And they came up the river, and they got off in places like Greenville and Greenwood and Clarksdale, and they became a part of the population and became a very important part of the Mississippi Delta and of Clarksdale. So a lot of my paper deals with these immigrant groups and their contributions to the Delta. So these ethnic groups, to read part of this, helped to make the Delta a diverse place, seen perhaps best in foodways. Italian restaurants like Lusco's and Gardenia's in Greenwood and Doe's in Greenville have broadened the eating habits well beyond those in other mostly rural places in the South. One can see the Lebanese culinary influence at the Rest Haven here in Clarksdale, owned by the Shimon family. The menu there has typical Southern fried chicken, country ham, cornbread and biscuits, mustard and turnip greens. Am I making you hungry yet? But also one can order stuffed grape leaves, cabbage leaves, kibbeh, and tabbouleh. Mexicans contributed tamales, which one can find at Clarksdale's famous Abe's Barbecue, run by another family of Lebanese ancestry. More generally, white and black Deltans sat on school boards, city councils, civic groups, church councils, and participated in sporting events with these Delta ethnic Southerners who enriched the imaginations of everyone in the Delta. So Tennessee Williams' childhood was spent in Clarksdale, living in the rectory of the Episcopal Church with his grandparents, and he heard the stories of the Delta, and he translated those into his great dramas. His mother wrote, "I always thought of him as a small pitcher with big ears. Everywhere he went with his grandfather as the rector, he heard stories, and he converted those stories into great literature." And the Italians and other ethnic groups appear in stories like Orpheus Descending, which somebody mentioned, and Baby Doll, one of the great movies about Mississippi, lurid though it is. But so many of his works have international settings. His work is filled with what one critic calls, from his memory, the many sights, smells, and sounds that make up the Delta. Blues musicians, mercantile stores, cotton gins, the flat, rich fields that stretch for miles. He always acknowledged the inspiration and character traits that the Delta gave him. He wrote, he said, out of respect for a South that no longer exists and the forces that had destroyed it. He liked to cite the words of one of his ancestors, United States Senator John Sharp Williams, who said when he left the Senate, "I'd rather be a hound dog and bay at the moon from my Mississippi plantation than remain in the United States Senate." I say that in reference to our current Senator Roger Boone Wicker, that in case he wants to bay at the moon, this group and this occasion are exactly the right ones. I also talk at the end about a wonderful novel I recommend to you, which is Cynthia Scherer's Celestial Jukebox about the contemporary Delta. So that's the sort of brief summary, very brief summary of my paper. But I want now to comment quickly on the paper Breaking the Devil's Bargain, Creating a Faithful Economy That Works for All of Us by Kevin Jones and Rosalie Harding. And Breaking the Devil's Bargain. The Devil's Bargain, they argue, is this bargain that early Southern Protestants made in the early 19th century from going where they were radically egalitarian and supported itinerant ministers, women ministers, African-American prophets. But in the early 20th century, John Wesley was famously a great critic of slavery. But in the early 19th century, they made this, in fact, a bargain with the plantation slave society, which was they would give up that anti-slavery criticism in order to focus on individual conversion. And they argued in the process they gave up any concern for whether society itself, in a bigger sense, was really just according to gospel dictates of the brotherhood of men and women. And so this is their argument, and it's a very powerful argument that I can know from the study of Southern religious history, which I taught at Ole Miss. And so the one thing I would add is that there have been Southern critics of this bargain, like Will Campbell, this Mississippi County Baptist minister who grew up as a hard-scrabble son of Southern farmers. But he had this conversion experience when he read this book, Freedom Road, about Reconstruction in the South. And the author portrayed in Reconstruction, freedmen and working-class poor white farmers had so much in common. And this was the hope of a different South than what actually happened. But that didn't happen. But Campbell became an advocate and a promoter of this idea of racial egalitarianism in the South. So we have great examples like that. The paper ends with a very profound discussion about how economics can be used to promote racial reconciliation by building up investment funds through communities throughout the South that will help to improve those communities and generate wealth among African Americans and poor whites in an economic basis for making a more just society. So that's a very brief and too succinct discussion of the paper, but it's a very good paper, and I recommend that you seek it out and find it. And Philip, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, next we're going to have Hans Sinha talk about his paper, A Beautiful Boy, which is actually a play. And then we'll have comments by Justice Robertson about his paper, Plague and Pandemic. You're also going to comment on Plague and Pandemic, I think, also. Thank you. Hans Sinha, everyone, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the test is whether you applaud when I'm finished, not when I start. So my name is Hans Sinha, and I teach at Ole Miss Law School. I've been there almost 20 years now. And when I first came here, I started doing some research on Emmett Till. And then it went more and more into the history of Emmett Till, and then his family, and then some more things. At one point I stumbled into the fact that his father was Lewis Till, and Lewis Till was actually executed by the U.S. Army in 1945. So we had this trial of Lewis Till, a court-martial in Italy, and we had a trial of the killers of Emmett Till here in Mississippi. So when I did that research, I eventually, for this society, wrote a play called The Beautiful Boy. And there are so many historical connections to it, but the only connection to Tennessee Williams is to me that it's a play. There's nothing else connecting this to Tennessee Williams. But there is a lot of connections to Mississippi. So what I figure I'll do, I'll just tell a little story about how it came about. And I hope you'll be as amazed by the historical connections, the little things we never expect to happen in terms of people touching other people's lives. And that's what I found so fascinating here. And to give it away, so to speak, I work in Ezra Pound into this story. And there is a connection between Ezra Pound and Emmett Till, and that's what I found so fascinating. So let me start what draws them together, and that is that when Emmett Till, when his body was found, he was wearing a silver ring. And that silver ring is what, when you read the transcript of the trial of Emmett Till, is what kind of puts it over the top, saying that that really was Emmett Till. The sheriff, the coroner, everybody else were testifying for the defendants, saying that that body could not have been a boy who had been in that river that long. It had to be somebody else's body. And the jury, for whatever reason, decided to quit the accused in that trial. But when you look at the facts, the one thing you can't get around is that ring was found on the ring finger of the left hand of that body, who was Emmett Till. And that ring came from his father, Lewis Till. And Lewis Till, by all accounts, and I don't want to be ill about the dead, at some point I'm sure was a great young man, but he married Emmett Till's mother, Mamie Till, and from all accounts it was not a happy marriage. it might have been an abusive marriage even, and they got divorced eventually. At one point, Lewis Till was given the option. He appeared before different judges, and he said he was given the option of going to jail or joining the army. Whatever might be said for Lewis Till, he had the smarts to take the option of joining the army during World War II. And it was assigned to a colored regiment at that time. And when they were sent over to the Italian sector eventually, they went through Morocco. And in Morocco, Lewis Till goes to a ring maker at the bazaar, and he makes a ring for him, for Lewis Till. And he inscribes that ring on the inside, LT, I forget the exact date, the date he was in Morocco. And then a lot of things happen. The war is going on. And I'll get to Esther Pound, and tell me when my time is up, because I can talk forever. It's not big. But he gets to the Italian sector, and his unit is loading and unloading ships. And at one point, there was an incident, two incidents, and then there's a little debate, I think, to be fair, about what really happened. But Lewis Till and actually 200 people are eventually arrested by the MPs, and they are accused of having broken into 2 homes, raping 2 women, and killing a gentleman. And it's pretty, I've read the court-martial transcript, it's pretty graphic testimony. There's a flip witness, there's misidentification, there's issues on that trial. But Lewis Till, when he is arrested, he's actually in jail initially. When the MPs come talk to him, they say, "Why don't you tell us what happened?" And his response is, "I'm not saying anything. You're going to do something to me anyway." So he before it existed, invoked a fifth, so to speak. He has put a trial together with another guy, and they're actually found guilty and sentenced to death. And that death sentence has to go all the way up and down the chain of command, and it's actually approved. He is put into, it's called the TDC, an outdoor jail facility in Pisa, Italy. And he gets into these what's called tiger cages, open-air cages, and his cellmate next to him happens to be no one else but Ezra Pound. And Ezra Pound ended up in that cell through happenstance or circumstance. And then Carl Sandburg said that Ezra Pound, you cannot talk about 20th century literature without, 2 minutes, I'm going. All right, without talking about Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound was part of the expats before the war, the Great War, and after the Great War in Paris and London. James Joyce would not have been published without him. T.S. Eliot was his friend, and then it was editor. There's an incredible background to Ezra Pound. I view him as one of the literary geniuses of our 20th century. But he went sour after the Great War. He ended up becoming the equivalent of the Tokyo Rose for Mussolini. And there was a gentleman who did the same thing for Hitler. When Mussolini was going down, and give me 2 more minutes on top of those 2 minutes, I can finish this up. Ezra Pound decides he better turn himself in or turn himself in. I always imagine how that happened, but he turned himself in, and eventually FBI actually comes to investigate him, interrogate him, because he began his broadcast from Mussolini and Phil Duce throughout the war. They bring him back to D.C., charge him with treason. At that point, pretty much every literary figure in the U.S. and America comes forward and says you cannot execute, put him in jail. This is Ezra Pound. So they find him, and use this in our classes. They had the court hearing where he was found not competent, and they immediately sent him to St. Elizabeth's Hospital in D.C. If you're from D.C., St. Elizabeth sits on top of the knoll across the river. It's a beautiful place. The assassin of President Garfield was actually one of the first inmates of that place. But he sits there for 12 years, and then he is eventually sprung and released. And Ike at one point, President Eisenhower at one point called him, what are we going to do with this difficult individual, Ezra Pound? So when I read all this, and the connection is, when he is in the jail cell in Italy, he watches Lewis Till, Emmett Till's father, walk to the gallows to be hung. And when they hang him, they eventually take all his belongings and send him back to his family, who was named Till. When Emmett Till gets on the train to go down and see his uncle in Sumner, for the first time he looks at his father's belongings, takes up the ring, puts it on his finger and says, "I'm a man now, Mom, I can wear this ring." And that's the connection between those two rings. That's the background of this paper that I wrote. So I kept thinking, how can we connect? I'm watching Ezra Pound sitting at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, kind of half crazy but a genius, knowing the connection between Ezra and Lewis and then Emmett. So my play is a fantastical scenario where Ezra Pound brings forth first Lewis Till, and then Mamie Till, and then eventually the beautiful boy, Emmett. So that makes sense. That's the background of this play. The play is a short 10-minute play, and it imagines what would happen if the four of them got together at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. That is
Thank you so much for that commentary on a very fine piece of work. It is a very quick read but a powerful piece. And so now we're going to have Justice Jimmy Robertson come and make comments on his own paper, Plague and Pandemic.
It is a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to also just reflect on the history of the Junebug Society, which is only 3 years, and it gives me the opportunity, since I forget who opened the door talking about there's a plaque on the wall on the bridge across the Charles River that we all visited 3 years ago. And I would appreciate very much if my wonderful and lovely wife, Linda, would at least nod, because she found it. She found the plaque. And it took a good while for her to get me to look at it, but it was great. Now, but the other thing that has been intriguing to me, but the program so far is, and it starts off with His Honor, who's done a wonderful job of leading the Junebugs. But no one, again, the context being so many people with a legal relationship here, no one has been put under oath before they were given the opportunity to speak. And I'm not going to change that practice. I guess how many of you, surely I'm not the only person here who has a smart aleck little brother. Surely somebody else. What I did with paper really goes back to an experience with my younger brother, 5 years younger. He is a doctor, and I'm just a lowly lawyer. But when my brother, for the longest while, didn't really get along too well. When we were close together, we saw each other a lot. It didn't work out too well. But then he goes as far away as one can go. He joins the Peace Corps. He winds up in Ceylon. Great stories there. He then comes back to the United States and winds up in the Gorge. Everybody knows what the Gorge is. The Gorge is between Washington State and Oregon State and the Columbia River. And my brother, the doctor, he sets up camp there, and we started having a little better relationship because we're 2,000 miles away. But then I guess it was probably in February of 2020 when we were having a telephone conversation. And my brother, we talked about a variety of issues. And he says to me at some point, says, I need for you to be sure you know that there is a pandemic coming. That there is something coming that you better take serious as a heart attack. I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. But those of you who will remember the history of the pandemic that we're still not totally out of, in that history, the first data that made it nationwide came from where my brother was. And that got my attention. What is it like to really try to study this phenomenon and then extrapolate to the humanity of it and just see where it leads you? So what I did is I decided to go back to an admonition that I'd received from a friend a long time ago, a lawyer friend, now deceased, who advised me that Albert Camus wrote some wonderful, wonderful works. But the first thing you need to learn about Camus is nobody just reads Camus. You reread Camus. And my brother, in that conversation that we had, he was out in the gorge and I was back in Mississippi, proceeded to tell me at the end of our conversation, he was going to reread Camus. And I decided to pick it up, go get, Shirley Lemuria had a copy. No, I didn't already have one, to my embarrassment. But I went and got one and began wading through it. And it took some wading. And as a result, I've produced a paper. Many conflicting instructions came to all of us who were participating in this program from those who were in charge. And the instructions I got led me to think that you were supposed to write a paper and then share it with everybody. That is not the message a lot of people got, but it had led me to the experience, though, of taking almost literally line by line and literally rereading and rereading sections of Camus' The Play until I felt like it and our play was the same phenomenon. So I've written this paper. About 25 hard copies are floating around somewhere, but you don't have to read mine. Just get Camus. His book is about 310 pages long, if I remember correctly. It's worth it. It's very much to take that and compare what we've gone through and to relate to that. I would recommend it very, very highly. And I'm going to do something that is given is following an instruction that we had initially. It was probably the one instruction that was just constantly being given to us to be sure that in what we do in this program, that we be brief. Thank you. And I did, no, I won't, because I've been sitting over there for about 30 minutes thinking of the call the letter I wrote to our chairman, and I don't think I'll talk about that anymore.
That was a good letter, Chick. That was a good letter, Chick.
No, I remember that very well, and
Make it be humorous.
All right. I'm gonna give this to who's next, and it's been a great evening so far. I look forward to the rest of it. look forward to getting to meet those of you that I haven't met so far. And I was listening to Charles Reagan Wilson just 2 days ago, and I'm listening to him again. So, but anyway, thank you so much.
Another famous Greenvillian. Thank you, Justice Robertson. Now we're going to hear from Rosalie Harden and Kevin Jones, and I think there's a motion on the floor. You're recognized to make a motion.
I have a motion. Since Hines said I didn't speak about anything in his paper, I would like Rosalie to speak only about her paper, because I believe Jimmy has spoken about his paper. So I'll hear from Rosalie and or Kevin about their paper. Thank you.
So let it be done.
Objection.
Without objection, so moved.
You can mention here, Rosalie. Of course. Rosalie, you tell us a little bit about this.
The thing I want to say about Hans' paper is it's not a paper, it's a play. And my husband, Kevin, who I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, was a drama major in college, and on the way here, he read it to me, and it brought me to tears. It is a very touching piece. It connects the past and the present and the future in a way that only drama can do, and your stage directions were awesome in terms of the way you connected with the ring. But listening to you talk about it today was even more interesting, knowing only about this much about what you actually do in your real life and the way you understand the law in a way, and trials, and talking about the trial of the men who murdered Emmett Till and the trial of his father and the misrepresentation of justice perhaps in each of them. And I found it totally, I was in rapt attention as Kevin was reading it to me. Can't wait to read it again. And I believe we may produce it as a work in a future Junebug Society. It's really, really powerful. So for those of you who were with us yesterday for the blessing of the monument dedicated to Billy Joe McAllister, know that I am a real priest. I am an Episcopal priest. And in introducing our paper that was actually written by my husband, Kevin, who's basically a journalist, it's important for you to know that he did get a lot of help from me. I suggested that he write it. I told him about a couple of books that I thought would be important for him to read as he wrote it, and he did follow my instructions and wrote a lovely paper. So there you go. But he's the writer, he wrote the paper, and I'm the preacher, so I get to talk. And I believe we were told we had 3 minutes, right? Okay, well, I'm a preacher and I can't do anything in 3 minutes, but I'm
going to be given 7 minutes because Hines just talked about his paper.
Okay, I can have 7 minutes. Okay, well, I may yield the floor to Kevin in a little bit, but anyway, I'm going to try to do in 3 minutes just a thing I think might be more helpful than talking a lot about the paper, but just to tell you about the work that Kevin and I do professionally these days. About 15 years ago, I was a parish priest in San Francisco, and Kevin started a venture capital fund called Good Capital. Good Capital only invested in companies that had a double bottom line, that they were companies to make a profit, but they also paid very careful attention to the work of their company, and that basically they were mission related. In a lot of ways you can think of a double bottom line business as a nonprofit who's figured out a way to make enough money to keep themselves sustainable. They have a nonprofit mission, but they're going to make money to support their mission. 2 companies that they invested in were Alter Eco chocolates that produced fair trade foods that were returned to community, where the money that they made on it was returned to the communities where their products were grown. And Better World Books, a company in Atlanta that came into being to somewhat compete with Amazon in some ways, selling books that were primarily used books and shipping them to customers with an ecologically sustainable footprint. I recommend both of those companies to you highly. In 2008, we launched an events company called Social Capital Markets, or SOCAP, that would bring more than 3,000 people annually from 60 plus countries every year, bringing investors who wanted to invest in double bottom line businesses, social entrepreneurs who were establishing businesses that would serve public good, and academicians who were studying this phenomenon. And then eventually we brought fund investors and Wall Street folks. It was quite a movement and got Wall Street's attention, and now most investment advisors will know what you're talking about when you say you want to do impact investing. We sold that company a few years ago, and because I was a parish priest, I had been helping, I hadn't been helping produce, I had been producing SoCal, and wondering why the church people weren't showing up, because this is about doing good, and doing good with money. So I decided that my next career was going to be producing an event or building a business around why churches should get engaged in this work. To help people understand that there are moral and ethical consequences to the way we spend, use, and save our money. We all tend to think that is there an economist in the room? Okay. So I would bet that most of us in this room think that the economy is like gravity. It just is. You can't do anything about it. Well, the economy is a human-made entity that we impact. We can choose to spend $1 with Amazon, or I'll go with my favorite, Walmart. And my favorite story about Walmart was when I was the publisher of the Itawamba County Times and calling on Walmart and calling on the Bank of Mississippi, now Bancorp South, and seeing the manager of Walmart come into the bank and hand the bank this bag of money. And I said to Dave Reeder, "Hey, you've got Walmart's business." And he said, "Yeah, that money will stay here 15 minutes. It's going to be in Bentonville before you leave the bank." We made $5 on that. It put the Main Street in Fulton out of business. We can change that. I want to say it's important to me as a person of faith and as a pastor for other pastors and priests and clergy and Christian folks and Jewish folks and Muslim folks to understand that how we spend our money is us. That money in my pocket is an ethical extension of who I am. And if you read the founder of the Christian faith's words in business, you can see that he, and that was Jesus, was talking about how messed up the Roman economy was in the first century and how that economy was completely destroying the underclass. Or to put a fine point on it, the economy was messing with his people, the Jews. In order to be a person who was of any means at all, if you had any money, if you were rich in the first century in Jerusalem, it was considered ill-gotten gains. To say that someone was rich was an insult. It was fairly obvious, I think, to most of us paying attention to the economy today that our economy is in similar shape, or maybe even worse. The 1% continue to get richer and richer and richer, and they get richer and richer and richer at the expense of the poor. That's not okay. It is not moral. It is not the gospel. I believe the church needs to be engaged in this conversation, and the work that Kevin and I do is developing programming, curriculum, and even financial tools. If you read his paper, you'll see a story about one of the community equity fund that he's been building that is a financial tool that helps the church engage in not just soup kitchens that feed the poor, which that's a great thing, but our work is trying to eliminate poverty, trying to eliminate the need for food programs in the first place, to find creative economic solutions to change the wealth gap, not just say, well, that's what it is, we got to deal with it. And particularly to eliminate the racial wealth gap in this country. Kevin's paper points to the ways that churches, particularly the earliest churches of this country before the Civil War, my church, the Episcopal Church, and my former church, and still loved church, the Baptist Church and the Methodist Church, they all were complicit, working together, and there's documents that shows that they created an intentional gap between the plantation owners and the enslaved people. It was clear that the church was complicit in creating that gap, and we believe it's the work of the church to reverse that and to stand with Jesus in creating a new way, a new economy that will serve all of God's children. Thank you.
Rosalie, Kevin, Rosalie wants Kevin to stand up. Please take a bow. Thank you for sharing your comments on that wonderful paper. Now, I know the event that Jay has certainly been waiting for, if y'all haven't. The inscrutable mascot of the June bugs would have to be Jay Wheeler. And he does clean up pretty well. You can see how dapper he is. I saw him in the parking lot on the way over here as I was rushing to get here at 6 o'clock. He was just coming in from a jog or some sort of non-June bug activity and looked a mess. And now he is very dapper and ready to talk about Professor Reagan's paper, Global Clarksdale. Resplendent, Jay, just resplendent. That's all I can say.
He doesn't want to talk about Charles's paper.
Go ahead and do that first.
It's whatever you want to do.
Couple of apologies first. Mike asked me a couple of years ago to join the group in Boston, and the apology I'm going to make is, as a typical boy after his freshman year in college, I was more interested in drinking beer than reading The Sound and the Fury. So I would come home every night having had a few beers and read about 3 pages and fall asleep, and I'd probably still be reading it at that pace. And so when I had a chance to take a second bite at the apple, I was all into the opportunity to read The Sound and the Fury and be a part of a group of scholars looking at it. And I proposed to Mike that everyone write a paper, and I believe everybody who attended that, with one exception, wrote a paper and delivered it. And I was so pleased to have people who took the opportunity while we were in Boston to not only educate themselves, but to elucidate the rest of us with what they found. I am reading a book on Clarksdale that opens with a quote from Eudora Welty, and she talks about looking at one's own world and going from there. Charles's predecessor at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, Bill Ferris, when he became chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, talked about that in his piece that they had in their newsletter. So I want to commend moving forward, going back to the format where everybody do some independent and original research and share it with the group on the subject that we're studying, because it meant a lot. Last year at this time, as Jimmy Robertson reminded us, we could not convene as we are today, and if we did, it would have been highly irresponsible. I know that I tried to be silly and lighten up things, and if I offended anybody at the time, I apologize, but I would rather have had everybody given the opportunity to laugh than the opposite. And I'll say another note, as some people know, the reason I could not be at Tallahatchie Flats yesterday is I was attending a memorial service for a family friend at St. Andrew's Episcopal Cathedral in Jackson, and afterwards there was a memorial luncheon. Her daughter committed suicide 3 weeks later, and there were a lot of people who, because of COVID or not enough stimulation or by their own hands, did not make it. And I only mention that because it had me thinking a lot about Quentin Compson III and Billy Joe McAllister, with focus on people who had taken their own lives fictionally, and I haven't fully grasped the fact that I now have to put that into context of one person and other people, as has occurred. But I think we all need to think about that, because we make light of it and it's not a light subject. But to the subject at hand, and I've not had a chance to write the paper because I've had a lot of balls in the air. When I was in Boston, my great uncle was actually, once again, the difference between fiction and nonfiction, in the class ahead of the fictional Quentin Compson III at Harvard, and I wrote a paper, as the people there know, on Southerners at Harvard at the time of Quentin Compson III. and found out in my original research, William Faulkner had it completely wrong, not partially wrong, 180% wrong. You were more likely to be accepted as a Southerner at Harvard than if you were a person of color. And all the social clubs and eating clubs were quite willing to take Southerners, and segregation in the closed society notwithstanding, that was just found by people in the North at the time. And then last year, and the paper grew to great proportions because there was so much, I put the Ode to Billy Joe in the context of American music the 5 years before and afterwards. It ended up being very long and exhausting, I might add. And if you want to read the paper, Mike has copies of the proceedings from last year for sale at a price that he will be happy to divulge. I will not go into that detail. But to the point at hand, my father and before him, other generations, were in Canton, and during Charles' tenure at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, before the conference on the book, they had the Delta Literary Tour, which I attended several times, and at least once at the Couture Mansion, I was at papers and talks and lunch, and the first Tennessee Williams scholar was Kenneth Holditch. He's at University of New Orleans, who got his PhD at Ole Miss and is a native of Hickory Flat in Benton County, between Lee County and Lafayette County. And I got several of his books and read them thereafter. And he said, which was much to my surprise, that between Columbus and Clarksdale, Reverend Dakin was the rector at Grace Church in Canton, which is a really sweet church. It's the best example of Carpenter Gothic in the state of Mississippi. 1852 was built as a temporary church, and I was there on Tuesday, and it's very much still standing, but a very interesting wooden version of a stone Gothic church. And in wanting to look this up and get information, I was told by a friend who also has Canton roots to contact Duncan Gray III, who, like Duncan Gray Sr., Jr., his father and grandfather, was a third generation to be bishop, and like me, he has Canton roots on both sides. His great-grandfather, through his paternal grandmother, was Edward McCready, whose son John McCready is a great Oxford artist, one of the great artists of the state of Mississippi, and his grandfather was at Grace Church. His mother's family were there. In fact, I was going through documents the other day. I got photo images for him and some other people of his father's baptism there, and his parents' wedding, and his aunt, uncle's wedding, and such. Almost done, sir. A lot more. But anyhow, Duncan was not aware that Reverend Walter Edwin Dakin was at Grace Church, unlike Columbus and Clarksdale, which had made a cottage industry out of Tennessee Williams. And I haven't fully synthesized all the information, and questions or comments later will be useful in writing all this up. So during his time at Grace Church, there were 4 weddings, 4 funerals, 7 baptisms, and 13 confirmations. He did some adjunct work. It was not a joint ministry at St. Mary's Church in Lexington. There wasn't a lot to do. He was a native of Warren County, Ohio. I'm not sure how he ended up in Mississippi, but he was not on the fast track to stardom. It was clearly a trajectory that was a dead end, notwithstanding his grandson's eclat. Columbus at that time had less than 100 people, more than 4,000 residents, and Canton had less than 4,000 people. Clarksdale had twice that, at around 8,000. He was not getting the top jobs in Cleveland or Cincinnati, even Akron or Dayton, being asked to go to Memphis or New Orleans. And the scholarship has not really picked up on the fact that although he lived 98 years and had a grandson who was devoted to him, who has put him into the history books, he did not seem to go particularly far. This is not about me. It interested me that one of the children he baptized was John Henry Woodruff Jr., and Henry Woodruff, his father, from whom he was estranged many years, was my great aunt and uncle's next door neighbor, who I remember vividly because we always seemed to visit with him whenever we got out of the car when we went over there. And I think my great aunt's first cousin was one of the weddings. And my point is, I think they were very much engaged in these communities at the time they were there when the grandson was a boy and not world famous, very much as if we were with them today. And I would simply add that when I talk about approximately 4,000 people in Columbus and Canton and 8,000 people here, the Episcopal churches, and I do want to say one more thing about this, were certainly not integrated at that time. And given various class differences in religion, you're talking about a very small part of that population that were going to the Episcopal churches. What did interest me greatly in looking at all of that was if you look at the church records from the antebellum period, there were slaves who were called servants who were both baptized and married in the Episcopal Church. And one of these unexpected surprises in looking at this information was that I discovered that when you get to the period of redemption and Jim Crow, things were a lot more segregated than they were before, which I, within the last year, discovered otherwise. So that was a great, great surprise. And the final thing I would say is the current rector at Grace Church is Beth Foose, who, as she told me when we talked last week about my coming in again on Tuesday for a second bite at that information. She is one of the people in dispatches from Pluto about which we talked, but she also asked me in the course of the conversation, which is another outcome to this, to write a history of Grace Church, which I had accepted. Whether I get very far with it, I think that's an aside that may happen. So interesting things happen if you dive into the waters and don't hit bottom like Billy Joe and have to get found. How many years later is it right now? 55?
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. You're looking like Joe Gatsby. All right, so it's gotten a little dimmer in here tonight with the sun going down. We think it's about video time. So this is one of the premier events of the evening.
Keep on burning, and we're rolling.